Hello everyone, my name is Olivia, and today I wanted to go through every single book that I've read so far in 2025. I've read 34 books and I have my Goodreads open right here, so it shows me every single book that I read in chronological order, so that's the way I'm going to go through it and just kind of show you how my reading year has gone so far. So the first book that I read in 2025 was Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens. This is a very short literary fiction about a 14-year-old ghost who haunts a monastery that a family moves into. And this is also like a Chopin inspired novel because he goes to the monastery with this woman named George, and our ghost protagonist kind of becomes obsessed with the woman that Chopin is with. This wasn't my favorite literary fiction. I think that the yearning just wasn't really there, and I feel like we didn't necessarily have a very fleshed out view of the ghost's obsession with George. I think I gave it 3 stars. It was good, the writing was nice, but it wasn't a new favorite of mine. The next book that I read was Loud Except Nothing Less Than the Life You Deserve by Drew Afwalo. Drew Afwalo is a very successful TikToker who is now a red carpet correspondent, and I really enjoy her work and what she stands for. She's a really big feminist. She's always standing up for the trans community and women and femmes in general, and I found it to be really entertaining. I found it to be insightful about not only her life, but how to stand up and stand out within your own life. I guess this is my first content creator memoir that I've read, and I thought it was really fun, really insightful, and it was a very quick read. I think it was like 6 hours long, so I had a great time with it. Then I read Whale Fall by Elizabeth O'Connor, and while the premise was interesting, I found this book to be incredibly dry and incredibly aimless. I can't understand why other people would enjoy this novel. It's a very lush, atmospheric literary fiction, but it just was not my cup of tea, so I think I also gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. My first book that I own a physical copy of that I read after Whale Fall was Everything You Ever Wanted by Louisa Salma. If you follow me on Instagram or TikTok, you know I am obsessed with this book, and I'm pretty sure I added this to my Goodreads want to read shelf because I saw it recommended under other novels that I really enjoyed. And this is a speculative fiction about a woman who lives in the UK who works at a marketing job, and her entire job is just so deeply asinine and also soul-sucking, and she is dealing with some pretty dark depression when she is offered the opportunity to go live on another planet called Nyx. 100 people are chosen after a very lengthy interview process to go to this new planet, but the catch is once you go to this new planet, you cannot return back to Earth. I think this is a great discussion of corporate life and mental health, but also what makes Earth and humanity so special. It's very speculative in the way that you don't get a lot of answers to the questions that may raise in your head when you read the book. That's my favorite part of speculative fiction. I think that being able to fill in the blanks that the author provides to you is really fun, and my best friend and I read this and we had very different interpretations of both the story and the ending, and I think that's what makes speculative fiction so fun, because you are able to interact with the story and fill in the blank spaces with what you think the story would be like if it unfolded in your mind. It is so timely and relatable, especially if you work in the marketing field like I do. It's like eerily relatable, and I just thought this was fantastic. Definitely one of my favorite reads of 2025. The next book that I read was on my physical TBR, but I decided to listen to it on audiobook, and the book is Cantoras. Cantoras is a wonderful historical fiction set during the 1970s in Uruguay. We follow 5 women who purchase this shed on this isolated coastline, and they go to this shed and they are able to truly be themselves because they're all sapphic. And it was such a beautiful exploration of these 5 different women and how they come together, and they come back to this place over the course of many years, and we follow so many different walks of life and how they connect with one another. And I just thought this was one of the most beautiful, eye-opening, and very timely reads that I read in 2025. I cannot recommend this historical fiction enough. After reading Cantoras, I read another amazing novel that I cannot stop thinking about, and it is The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginsburg, and this is translated by Frances Frenet. This is a very quick read. I think I read this in one sitting. We follow an unnamed woman who is married to a man, and on page 1 she shoots her husband in the eyes, and then we flash back to their initial meeting as a couple, their eventual courtship, and then their marriage, and then the downfall of that marriage and what led to that moment. And I think that Natalia Ginsburg perfectly basically explores the height of a marriage and then the eventual downfall of it. And this reminds me a lot of Tolerate It by Taylor Swift, which I know so many people tell me is inspired by Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I know. But it reminds me a lot of that song because we follow this woman who's infatuated with her husband, and she centers her entire existence around his approval and his attention. But what happens when that man is continually mistreating you, continually tolerating you, and continually disrespecting you? This is the type of book that I wish we had read in college because it's something that you can definitely write essays about. It's something that you can definitely analyze with a class. She wrote this book in less than 100 pages and she said, I don't need to write anymore, and I commend her for that. This is definitely one of my favorite reads of 2025. Cannot recommend this enough. I will constantly talk about this until the end of time. This is just a powerful, impactful, perfect story. The next book that I listened to on audiobook is A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini, and this is set in Afghanistan. This was written in 2007, so keep that in mind because we follow two young women who are married off to this abuser, and we follow one girl who is married off to him at like 14 years old, and then she grows up, and then we follow the younger girl who eventually marries the same man, and they have to live under the household together in a very volatile and abusive situation. A creator that I follow, Yuval, on TikTok, read The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, and he said that it felt somewhat emotionally manipulative to constantly have this abuse and this torture thrust upon these protagonists, and that's kind of how I felt about A Thousand Splendid Suns. It reminded me very much of A Little Life, where you have to wonder, when is the author crossing the line from telling a story and informing the reader and just writing torture porn? And that's what I wonder about A Thousand Splendid Suns. I think it's all very subjective and how you personally consume the story and what you think is too much and crossing the line. But if you enjoy this story, I'm not holding it against you. You can enjoy whatever you want. It's a free country, I guess. I don't know about that anymore. The next book that I read, I absolutely hated, and it was The Favorites by Lane Fargo. This is that ice skater Wuthering Heights retelling book that I thought was genuinely absolutely bullshit. The way that the relationship unfolds in the story that's marketed as a romance is insane to me. It's bonkers to me how toxic and abusive and manipulative this relationship is, and people are like, this is the best story ever. I do not understand how you thought that was a good romance to read. I have not read a more convoluted, nonsensical, infuriating read. The fact that this is marketed as a romance is baffling. I haven't wished ill will towards a set of characters more than these in a while. And that's all I have to say about that. Then I read, as a palate cleanser, Lost and Lassoed by Lila Sage. This is the third installment in the Rebel Blue Ranch series that I love. I love Lila Sage's writing. I think that her stories are so fun and lighthearted and just what I need to get out of a book slump or to cleanse my palate after reading a book that I did not enjoy. And this is my favorite installment in the series. We follow a single father who falls in love with the protagonist of the first book's best friend. It was a great read that I had a great time with, that I need to add to my shelves because I definitely do want to eventually reread it if I'm ever in a book slump, and I own like the rest of the series, so I need to get myself a copy of that one immediately. And then I read a nonfiction called We Believe the Children, the story of a moral panic. I got really obsessed with the satanic panic of the 1980s, and in case you don't know what that is what helped inspire Stranger Things. So during the 1980s, people got really conservative in terms of morals and religion, and people started to accuse others of doing satanic rituals against their children, whether they were teachers or caretakers, but they also accused young children of being satanic by just playing D&D, which is what inspired Eddie's story in Stranger Things, because he's inspired by these three boys who were accused of torturing people even though they didn't do anything. I'll be sure to link the trial because it's a really interesting trial. So I wanted to learn more about the Satanic Panic. I thought it was a really interesting example of mass hysteria, and it's not my favorite nonfiction of all time. It's a bit dense, and I wish it focused on the central trial that was occurring in the beginning of the novel, but it touched upon a bunch of different instances of the Satanic Panic kind of taking over a neighborhood or a state. And I think it's a very interesting novel to kind of have in your mental database when looking at society today, because there are a lot of instances where people dogpile and people have this very hysterical attitude towards things that they deem morally wrong. I do see instances of the moral panic kind of cropping up again in 2025, and with this book under my belt, I can recognize those symptoms that I saw within this nonfiction happening again today. The next nonfiction that I listened to was Master of Me, The Secret to Controlling Your Narrative by Keke Palmer. It's definitely more of a self-help book than a memoir. She does touch upon different instances in her career that she wanted to explain a little bit more from her own words and from her own perspective, and I did appreciate that. It wasn't my favorite memoir of all time. I just was really jazzed to be able to hear Keke Palmer's voice for like hours upon hours when listening to that audiobook. Another nonfiction that I read right after that was How Dare the Sunrise, Memoirs of a War Child by Sandra Oringimana. Sandra is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and she eventually moved to America with her family, and she recounts many different instances of her life and what it's like to be a refugee moving to America, and how she used her voice to amplify the current situations that are happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I really wanted to learn more about what's happening in the Congo, and I felt like this memoir was a fantastic starting point because I wanted to get someone's perspective from the inside. And I do highly recommend that you read up on what's happening in the Congo because there are a lot of different situations that are happening, and this was just kind of like my diving off point to learn more about it. So I do have a couple more nonfictions about Congo on my TBR that I do want to get to, but this one was a fantastic place to start. After reading a ton of nonfiction about some pretty heavy topics, I decided to go for something a little bit lighter by picking up Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. This was a really fun Ali Hazelwood book. I have fun with all of her books. I really do like college romance books. I love the idea of them being on campus and being able to interact a lot, and this is a romance between a diver and a swimmer. And the only thing that kept me from giving this 5 stars was the best friend in this novel, because the best friend is the ex of the love interest in this book, and her jealousy was just so unfounded and so out of left field. It felt completely jarring in a way where I'm like, why are you acting like a child when you tried to put these two characters together in the first place? It was such an outlandish way to kind of tie all of these characters together, and I think that Ali Hazelwood didn't need to make our protagonist's best friend also be the ex of the love interest. I think that that was too messy, and I did have a good time reading it. It's just when the best friend kind of like blew up towards our main character Scarlett, I was like, girl, what are you doing? After that, I reread the Hunger Games trilogy in preparation of Sunrise on the Reaping, and this was my first time rereading the trilogy since I initially read it in middle school. This is like one of the most perfect trilogies to ever exist. Suzanne Collins is on a different level when it comes to her characterization, to her world building, to her messaging. And I truly believe that Maturing is realizing that Mockingjay is a perfect end off to this entire trilogy once you realize that every single installment in this trilogy is a Hunger Games that Katniss has to take part in. You may not realize it, it may not be official, but Katniss does take part in another Hunger Games in Mockingjay, and that's why there are so many deaths to favorite characters that are deemed senseless, because when you are in the Hunger Games or when you are at war, every single death is senseless. And I just thought that every single detail that she included in this trilogy is perfection. The next book that I listened to, but I own a physical copy of, is A Woman Is No Man by Rum. In this book, we follow 3 different Palestinian women. We follow our main character, Esra, who is a Palestinian in Palestine when she is married off to a man and moves to, I think, Brooklyn? Yes, Brooklyn. Then we follow her daughter, Dea, who is living in modern Brooklyn, and she is looking back at her relationship with her mother and her father. And then we follow Dea's grandmother, who is the mother-in-law to Esra, and how she is a very traditional woman who kind of reinforces the idea that a woman is subservient to the men in the household and how they're just meant to serve, get married, provide children, specifically sons. And she kind of views Esra in a darker light because Esra only had daughters. So if she's only able to provide daughters to her husband, she's not necessarily useful as a woman. It was really gripping. It was entertaining in a way where you couldn't stop listening to it. And I thought this was absolutely fantastic. I think this perfectly captures the essence of being an ethnic woman in a household and how your life greatly differs from the men in your household. Very good. Very, very, very good. After that, I was invited to a meta event where I was able to meet Amanda Nguyen, who is the first Southeast Asian woman in space, and she wrote this memoir chronicling her assault at Harvard and her journey to pass these laws and advocate not only for herself, but other people who have been sexually assaulted to help create these laws to protect their DNA, protect their evidence, and eventually be able to bring them to court to seek justice. This was a fantastic memoir. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend the audiobook. After that, I read Sunrise on the Reaping, which I have an entire reading vlog about. Just know that I loved it. It was fantastic. I cannot wait for the movie. I genuinely think that the movie is going to win awards. I thought that Suzanne Collins really knocked it out of the park with this one. If you want to learn more about my thoughts, go watch my reading vlog. I had a lot of fun talking about my thoughts there, and I spoke about it in depth on my reading vlog. I listened to Be Ready When the Luck Happens by Ina Garten. I don't know why, but I love reading memoirs about people in the culinary field, and Ina Garten is someone who has a show on the Food Network called Barefoot Contessa, and I remember watching that show as a kid with my mom, and she always had this really soothing voice. She always made food for her husband Jeffrey, and this is basically just a memoir sharing her life and her come to fame on Food Network. And my review of it was I was born into the wrong tax bracket, because truly life is that beautiful when you're rich and successful, and wow. I just wish I could live in Martha's Vineyard with Ina Garten and have these backyard parties with her and Jeffrey and her celebrity friends, because that life seems nice. Then I decided to pick up Winnie the Pooh, which I got for myself in Rhode Island when I went there in the beginning of the year. But I forgot how cheeky this story is. The play on words is great. The story is so sweet and heartfelt, and this was like the perfect thing to bring me out of a book slump. If you're ever in a book slump, reread one of your favorite childhood books, because not only will it make you really happy and kind of feed your inner child, but it's just such an effortless read that gets you back into the swing of things. I had a great time with this. I did not have a great time with the next book, and it was I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. We follow a protagonist who is obsessed with the woman that the man that she's having an affair with is also sleeping with. So the man that she's dating is married. He's sleeping with the protagonist, but he's also sleeping with another woman who our protagonist is obsessed with. I can deal with like an unlikable main character who's obsessed with someone else in a way that is deeply toxic, but looking at the story from the lens of, hey, internalized misogyny really set off red flags for me. In my Goodreads review, I put, I'm still hung up on the fact that for nearly 5 hours of this audiobook, this protagonist tears a successful woman to shreds over how she moves, eats, behaves, yet spares about 1 or 2 chapters discussing the power imbalance white men have over society and the women they date. The protagonist claims she is above this white woman through some sort of mental gymnastics, yet for the entirety of this novel, she kneels before a first-class, solid gold, insignificant loser of a man who she centers her entire existence around. Internalized misogyny drips off every chapter. And that's how I feel about it. Fuck that book. Then I read another book that I didn't enjoy, and it was The Guest Cat. I listened to this one also on audiobook. It was a story about this couple who is kind of lonely, and they befriend a cat in their neighborhood. And what started out as a very sweet novel kind of delved into something that I just didn't enjoy. And I'm not going to tell you why, because that would spoil the entire story. I feel like it was mismarketed because it feels like it's going to be centered around the cat, and it's really not. It's really not. On a whim, I decided to start listening to this audiobook called We Used to Live Here, and I listened to that 10 to 12 hour audiobook in one sitting. Are you kidding me? I put this on a Sunday and I could not stop listening to this horror audiobook. I really love horror books on audiobook because this one had a little bit of sound effects woven into the narrative, but also I just think it's so entertaining to be able to listen to the story and have the narrator add this creepy element audibly rather than just reading the text. And we follow this couple who move into this new household when the previous owners show up to their doorstep and say, "We used to live here. Can we come in?" And our protagonist is a people pleaser, and she says, "Okay, come in." And from there onwards, shit hits the fan. And when I say this was such an entertaining read, I really enjoyed it. I know people said that they didn't enjoy the twist at the end of the book. I thought it was fun. I just think that I had a great time with it. I was eating the story up, and now I'm trying to find more horror audiobooks to add to my TBR because this one was so entertaining. I had such a great time with it. And then I listened to Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, which was recently turned into a film that I do have to see, and this is a historical fiction following two young boys who are sent to a reform school during Jim Crow. And this historical fiction had a really great plot twist that completely threw me off guard. I definitely do want to see the movie to compare and contrast. It wasn't my new favorite historical fiction of all time, but I did really appreciate it, and I really did enjoy listening to it on audiobook. And then the next audiobook that I listened to that I didn't enjoy was The Unworthy, which is by the same author as Tender as the Flesh, which I DNF'd because it really creeped me out. For me, this story was lacking in everything, in characterization, and intrigue. Everything about this story just was not my cup of tea, and it made me realize that this author is just like not my favorite author. So the next time that one of their books gets translated to English, I'm probably gonna pass on it because I tried Tender as the Flesh, I tried The Unworthy, I did not like both. I think it's time to call it a quits. But you know what religious inspired story I did eat up and love? Conclave. Are you kidding me? Conclave is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I decided to pick up the book because it was provided to me by Vintage Books, so thank you so much to them. And this is exactly like the movie. I think that Conclave is like one of the most perfect book to movie adaptations. It's very faithful to the text. Everything about the movie is just as good as the book, and being able to read the book after initially seeing the movie is even more entertaining because you can picture all the different characters in your head because there are a lot of characters in Conclave, and it's hard to keep them in order, but once you see the movies and you put faces to the names, reading this is very easy to follow along with. Read the book, watch the movie, do whatever you want, but consume this story in some way. I feel like I've been talking forever, but the next book that I initially started reading and then I felt like it was putting me into a book slump, so I decided to start listening to it on audiobook, is The Safe Keep. The Safe Keep follows a woman who lives in a house in the Netherlands, and she's very protective of this house. She's very protective of her mother's memory within the house, and it kind of gets ruined when her boyfriend invites his new girlfriend to stay in the house because he's going away on a business trip, and our protagonist doesn't enjoy the girlfriend's personality and presence, but over the course of time these two women form a connection that becomes very toxic and obsessive, and it's a very hot book. I feel like whenever people pitch The Safe Keep, they always mention that this highlights a piece of history from the Netherlands that is kind of brushed under the rug, and you're always like, okay, but what is that piece of history? But I also don't want to tell you because that's part of the plot twist of The Safe Keep. I'm just going to tell you that this is one of the steamiest historical fictions I've ever read. It's sapphic, it is full of yearning, but the thing that kept me from falling completely in love with it was how slow the pacing was and how inconsistent the characterization was, because it felt like these two women were so hot and cold, and that can be entertaining, but it felt very inconsistent and very random, where one chapter the protagonist hates the girlfriend and then the other chapter she's obsessed with her. It just felt so muddled and confusing, but I still thought that this historical fiction was really impactful, really eye-opening, and really unique and hot. Then I read Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. I will read any single nonfiction John Green decides to write, and he highlights how tuberculosis is an easily preventable disease. It is one of the most preventable infectious diseases that kills over 1 million people every single year. I listened to it on audiobook because I love John Green's narration, and I decided to get a copy because anytime I find a nonfiction that I really do enjoy and I want to eventually highlight and reread and kind of refer back to in the future, I add it to my bookshelf collection. So I'm really happy I was able to get a copy from my mom, who knew that I fell in love with this nonfiction. Then I read The Echoes by E.B. Wild. This is from the same author as The Bass Rock, which I really did enjoy, and I thought to myself, I should go into this author's Goodreads, see what else she's written, and see if I'll potentially enjoy it as much as I did with The Bass Rock. And this book came out this year, which was a pleasant surprise. It was really disappointing. It was marketed as this story between a boyfriend and a girlfriend. The boyfriend passed away and now he's a ghost who is haunting his girlfriend. But he's not necessarily haunting her, he's more just like observing her in their apartment. It really disappointed me, especially because I loved The Bass Rock so much. So I think I gave this one like 2 stars. It just was not my favorite. Then I reread Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. This is my second copy, which is a different edition and different translation. And I preferred the other translation that I read. I felt like when I read the other edition of Meditations that I have, which let me just get it because it's on my desk. This one, I really enjoyed this edition, which is translated by Gregory Hayes. And this one is translated by Martin Hammond. And this one just wasn't my favorite. I think that this edition is a lot stronger and a lot more compelling, but I still really enjoyed rereading Meditations. I think that Meditations is just a great way to learn more about Stoicism and that area of philosophy, which I'm really interested in. Then I listened to Days at the Morizaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa. I think I have to stop with these cozy Japanese novels because they never really impact me or leave a lasting impression. And we follow this woman who is the niece of the owner of the bookshop, and she is going through some tough times in her job when she moves in with her uncle, and she doesn't necessarily understand the importance of reading in terms of like the emotional connection one can have towards books. And then over time she eventually learns that books are magical and they transport you into different worlds and they help you connect with other people. I felt like the first half of the book was pretty strong, but then the second half I just didn't feel as connected to the story. So that's how I felt about that. And then I listened to What I Ate in 1 Year by Stanley Tucci, and this is literally like a diary of what Stanley Tucci ate in a year and who he ate it with and the different experiences that he had. I really enjoyed his initial memoir, Taste, which chronicles his come to fame and then his eventual battle with cancer. This one felt a little bit more self-indulgent, like he just wanted to write about what he ate and the different restaurants that he went to. I think you have to be a true fan of Stanley Tucci to enjoy this memoir. And the final thing that I have read so far this year, my 34th book, is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. I listened to this on audiobook. Can you tell that I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks this year and I haven't been reading physically because I don't have the time to? This is one of the most eye-opening, informative nonfictions that I have ever listened to, which highlights the HeLa cells. The HeLa cells are cancer cells that were taken by Henrietta Lacks when she was suffering from cervical cancer, and they are cells that are still alive today, even though she passed away in the 50s. And they are the cornerstone of medical research, and she didn't receive a single cent from her cells. And if you want to dive into scientific nonfiction, this is definitely a great read. It's very approachable. It's very easy to digest. This may sound like really complex and really boring in a way, but I think that It was a really interesting read, and it really opened my eyes to an area of science that I didn't know about beforehand, and also a really important figure in history that we don't ever really hear about. And those are the 34 books that I read in 2025 so far. I feel like I've had a really good reading year so far, despite the fact that I don't have a lot of time to read. Let me know if you've read any of these books that I read this year. Let me know if there are any books that you would highly recommend that I add to my TBR to read during the rest of 2025. If you want to see what I'm currently reading in real time, you can follow me over on Instagram because I post about what I'm currently reading a lot on my Instagram stories. And if you want to help support this channel in a very easy way, you can join my memberships to get my videos early, to take part in some exclusive membership polls about future videos of mine. And it's just a great way to help support my channel if you have the means to do so. Thank you so much for sticking around for this very long video, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!